never expected a haircut to change my life. Looking back now, the signs were probably obvious. My friends certainly think so. Every time I tell them how Arthur and I finally got together, they all say the same thing. Ricardo, that man was flirting with you for 2 years. Maybe he was. Maybe I was too. The problem was that neither of us ever seemed willing to be the first one to admit it. It all started when I moved across town after a breakup. Nothing dramatic, no screaming match, no cheating scandal. Just one of those relationships that slowly ran out of air until both people realized they were staying together out of habit. 3 weeks after we ended things, I was trying to rebuild my routine. New apartment, new gym, new coffee shop, and eventually a new barber. The place was called North Street Barber Company. Nothing fancy, just exposed brick walls, old leather chairs, and the smell of shaving cream mixed with aftershave. I almost didn't go in. There was a line, and I was tired after work. But then I looked through the front window and saw him, Arthur. At the time, I didn't know his name. I just noticed a guy around my age standing behind one of the chairs. Dark hair, strong shoulders, a neatly trimmed beard. The kind of smile that made you immediately wonder if he was naturally charming or if he knew exactly what he was doing. I remember thinking he looked more like somebody who belonged in a magazine ad than behind a barber chair. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in front of him. "What are we doing today?" he asked. His voice was warm and relaxed. I explained what I wanted, and he nodded. Easy enough. Then he ran his fingers through my hair, a completely normal thing for a barber to do. Except for some reason, my stomach flipped. I blamed it on the fact that I hadn't been touched much since my breakup. That explanation worked for about 30 seconds. Then Arthur smiled at me through the mirror. "So, you new around here?" The conversation flowed easily after that. Too easily. Usually, haircuts were awkward for me. A few minutes of small talk, some silence, then I left. But with Arthur, 45 minutes disappeared before I even realized it. We talked about movies, sports, terrible dating experiences, the neighborhood, travel. Somehow every topic led naturally into another. By the time he finished, I felt weirdly disappointed that the appointment was over. "Looks good," he said. I checked the mirror. Honestly, it was the best haircut I'd had in years. "Yeah," I said. "You did a great job." His grin widened. "I know." I laughed. Confident. Occupational requirement. When I stood up to leave, he held out his hand. "I'm Arthur, by the way." Ricardo. His grip was firm. For a second, neither of us let go. Not long enough to be strange, just long enough to notice. Then I walked out. That should have been the end of it. Except 4 weeks later, I booked another appointment, specifically with Arthur. Then another, and another. Soon, getting a haircut from him became part of my monthly routine. The problem was that every visit made me like him more, and every visit left me more confused, because Arthur was impossible to read. Some days he'd tease me relentlessly. "You're late." I would glance at my phone. "I'm literally 2 minutes early." Not early enough. Other days he'd remember random details I'd mentioned months before. "How was your sister's wedding?" Or, "Did you ever finish that hiking trail you were talking about?" Nobody remembers stuff like that unless they're paying attention, right? At least that's what I kept telling myself. Then he'd casually mention a date he'd gone on, or some woman flirting with him, and I'd immediately feel stupid for imagining anything. The worst part was that I genuinely looked forward to seeing him, not because of the haircut, because of him. I'd find myself thinking about conversations we'd had weeks earlier, wondering what he was doing, looking forward to my next appointment, which was ridiculous. He was my barber. That was it. At least, that's what I kept repeating to myself. Then came the afternoon. Everything started changing. It was nearly 2 years after that first haircut. 2 years of jokes. 2 years of lingering eye contact. 2 years of flirting that neither of us was brave enough to acknowledge. I walked into the shop on a Thursday after work. Arthur was finishing with another client. The moment he saw me, he smiled. Not the polite customer service smile, the real one. The one that somehow always made me feel like I was the only person in the room. There he is. I sat down in the waiting area. Miss me? Obviously. He said it so naturally that I almost missed it. Almost. My heart stumbled. Arthur didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did. A few minutes later, I was in his chair. The familiar routine began. Cape around my shoulders, hair dampened, scissors clicking, conversation flowing. But something felt different. Arthur seemed distracted. Not nervous exactly, just thoughtful. A couple of times I caught him looking at me in the mirror before quickly looking away. By then, I knew him well enough to notice when something was off. "You okay?" I asked. He hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah." The answer came too quickly. I raised an eyebrow. That sounded convincing. He laughed. It wasn't supposed to. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The shop around us buzzed with conversation and clippers. But somehow, it felt like there was a separate bubble around just the two of us. Then Arthur took a breath, like he was working up the courage to say something. And suddenly, for the first time in 2 years, I had the strange feeling that whatever happened next might change everything. Arthur set the scissors down and grabbed the spray bottle. For a few seconds, he seemed completely focused on my hair. But I knew him too well by then. Something was definitely on his mind. "Okay," I said. "What's going on?" He looked at me through the mirror. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've checked the same section of my hair 4 times. A laugh escaped him. "Have I?" "Arthur. Ricardo." We both smiled. That had become our thing over the years. The fake, serious tone. The playful back and forth. The problem was that lately, those moments didn't feel entirely playful anymore. There was something underneath them, something neither of us seemed willing to name. Arthur shook his head. "Nothing's wrong. You're a terrible liar. Good thing I'm not a lawyer." I groaned. That was awful. It was. For a second, his eyes stayed on mine in the mirror. Neither of us looked away. Then another customer walked into the shop, and the moment disappeared. The rest of the appointment felt strangely tense. Not uncomfortable, just charged. Like both of us were dancing around a conversation we weren't having. When Arthur finally finished, he spun the chair around. "There." I looked in the mirror. Perfect, as usual. "You somehow keep making me look better." "That's because you're giving me a lot to work with." The words came out before he seemed to realize what he'd said. My stomach flipped. Arthur froze for half a second. Then he cleared his throat. Meaning your hair. Of course. Obviously. We were both terrible at this. I paid at the front desk and grabbed my jacket. Normally I'd leave right away. Instead, I lingered. Arthur lingered too, which wasn't normal. He usually started preparing for his next client immediately. Instead, he stood nearby, pretending to organize tools that were already organized. Finally, I laughed. What are we doing? He blinked. What? We've both been standing here for 2 minutes pretending we're busy. A grin tugged at his lips. You noticed that? I noticed. His eyes dropped briefly to the floor, then back to me. And for the first time since I'd known him, Arthur actually looked nervous. That caught me completely off guard. Arthur wasn't nervous around anyone. I'd seen him charm angry customers, handle packed weekends, talk effortlessly to complete strangers. Confidence practically radiated off him. But right then, he looked uncertain. Ricardo. The way he said my name immediately made my pulse speed up. Yeah? He opened his mouth, closed it, then laughed softly. Never mind. I stared at him. Nope. What? You're not doing that. His smile widened. Doing what? Building suspense, and then backing out. Arthur rubbed the back of his neck, a habit I'd only seen when he was genuinely uncomfortable, which somehow made me even more curious. Forget it. Arthur. Ricardo. I pointed at him. No. He laughed again. The sound was nervous this time, and suddenly I realized something. He wasn't joking. Whatever he wanted to say mattered. A lot. The realization hit me so hard that I forgot how to breathe for a second. Because there was only one reason I could imagine for Arthur looking like this, and I was terrified to let myself believe it. The shop had gotten quieter. Most of the afternoon rush was gone. A couple of barbers were cleaning stations. Someone was sweeping near the back. Nobody seemed to be paying attention to us. Arthur took a slow breath, then another. Finally, he spoke. Can I ask you something? My heart practically jumped into my throat. Sure. He studied my face, like he was looking for a reason not to continue. Apparently, he didn't find one, because a second later he said, Are you seeing anyone? Everything inside me stopped. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd imagined hearing it. What? Arthur's ears turned slightly red, a detail that somehow made him even more attractive. Are you dating anybody? I stared. He stared back. The entire world seemed to go quiet. 2 years. 2 years of wondering. 2 years of mixed signals. 2 years of convincing myself I was imagining things. And now Arthur was standing there, asking if I was single. My brain completely failed. I should have answered immediately. Instead, I just looked at him like an idiot. Arthur laughed nervously. Wow. What? That's not exactly a confidence boost. I finally snapped back to reality. No. His eyebrows lifted. No? No, I'm not seeing anyone. The relief that flashed across his face was impossible to miss. And suddenly my heart started pounding even harder. Because Arthur looked relieved. Really relieved. Like he'd been hoping for that answer. Then he looked down and smiled to himself. A genuine smile. Not the playful one he gave customers, Not the charming one he used when joking around. Something softer, more vulnerable. And that terrified me, because now there was no hiding from what was happening. Arthur looked back up. Our eyes met. Neither of us looked away. Then he said the words I'd secretly imagined hearing for almost 2 years. So, he swallowed, then smiled. Would you maybe want to get dinner sometime? My brain short-circuited, completely, absolutely gone. I think I actually forgot how language worked, because Arthur started laughing, and only then did I realize I'd been staring silently for several seconds. Ricardo? Yeah? You okay? No. His grin grew. No? I've been waiting for you to ask that for like a year. The words escaped before I could stop them. Arthur froze. Then he laughed harder than I'd ever seen. The kind of laugh that reaches someone's eyes. The kind that's impossible to fake. A year? I shrugged. Maybe longer. His smile softened. Good. Good? Because I've been trying to work up the courage for months. That answer hit me harder than I expected. Months. Arthur had been thinking about this for months. Just like I had. Neither of us had known. And now we were standing there, grinning at each other like idiots. It felt surreal, like one of those moments you replay in your head later because it doesn't seem real. Arthur pulled out his phone. Dinner? I smiled. Dinner. And as we exchanged numbers, something ridiculous considering he'd already had my appointment information for 2 years, I had a feeling this was only the beginning. I just didn't realize how quickly Arthur was about to become the most important person in my life. The first thing that surprised me about our first date was how normal it felt. Not awkward, not forced, not like two people trying to figure each other out. It felt like Arthur and I had already been dating for months. Maybe because we'd spent 2 years building something without realizing it. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown the following Friday. Nothing fancy, just dim lighting, good food, and enough background noise to keep things comfortable. I arrived first, which gave me 15 minutes to question every life decision I'd ever made. What if this was weird? What if we'd built up an imaginary connection that didn't actually exist? What if the chemistry disappeared the second we weren't barber and customer anymore? Then Arthur walked through the door, and every concern disappeared instantly. He spotted me and smiled. That smile, the same one I'd spent 2 years trying not to think about. Except this time, it was directed at me as a date. Not a client, not a friend, a date. For some reason, that realization hit harder than I'd expected. Arthur sat down across from me. You look nervous. I laughed. So do you. Fair. The waiter arrived before either of us could say anything else. Probably a good thing, because the tension between us was intense. Not bad, just new. Eventually, drinks arrived. Conversation started flowing, and within 20 minutes we were back to being ourselves. Laughing, teasing each other, telling stories. The only difference was that now neither of us had to pretend the attraction wasn't there. At one point, Arthur shook his head. I still can't believe this. What? You seriously had no idea? I nearly choked on my drink. Arthur. What? You flirted like a man trying to communicate through smoke signals. His laugh echoed across the table. Excuse me? You heard me. I thought I was being obvious. You spent 2 years asking me about movies and making bad jokes. They were excellent jokes. They were terrible. Arthur pointed at me. Rude. I smiled. You asked. The truth was that we'd both been clueless. Arthur admitted he'd convinced himself I wasn't interested. Apparently, every time I'd left the shop after an appointment, he'd spent the rest of the day criticizing himself for not asking me out. Meanwhile, I'd spent those same 2 years wondering if I was imagining every signal he sent. By dessert, we were both laughing about it. Two grown men, completely incapable of communicating. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. When dinner finally ended, neither of us seemed eager to leave. So we walked. The evening air was cool. The streets were busy, but not crowded. For a while we wandered without any destination, just talking. At some point, Arthur's hand brushed mine. Then again, neither of us moved away. A few minutes later, our fingers intertwined naturally, like they'd been doing it forever. I looked down, then at him. Arthur smiled softly. Okay? I squeezed his hand. Yeah, more than okay. The crazy thing was how comfortable it felt, like something clicking into place, like a puzzle piece finally finding where it belonged. Neither of us said much after that. We just kept walking together. Eventually, we reached the riverfront. The city lights reflected across the water. People passed around us, but somehow it felt like there was nobody else there, just Arthur and me. He leaned against the railing. I stood beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Arthur looked at me, really looked at me, and suddenly the atmosphere shifted. The playful energy disappeared, replaced by something deeper, something quieter. My heart started racing again. Arthur seemed nervous, which was becoming one of my favorite things about him. The confident barber who could talk to anyone apparently struggled whenever emotions got involved. Can I tell you something? He asked. Of course. He looked out across the water, then back at me. I almost asked you out after 6 months. I blinked. 6 months? He nodded. Then I convinced myself you'd say no. I couldn't stop smiling. Arthur shook his head. Then after a year, I was positive you weren't interested. A year? Yep. I laughed. Arthur, after a year, I was basically scheduling haircuts based on when I missed seeing you. His eyes widened. Seriously? I immediately regretted admitting that, until Arthur's grin appeared. That's ridiculously adorable. I take it back. Nope. I absolutely take it back. Too late. We both laughed. Then the silence returned. But this time it felt different. Closer. Arthur stepped slightly nearer. Neither of us mentioned it. Neither of us needed to. I could feel my pulse in my throat. The city lights reflected in his eyes. For a second, I forgot everything else. The people, the traffic, the sounds around us. All of it disappeared. Arthur's gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, then returned to my eyes. And suddenly I knew. He knew it too. Neither of us moved immediately. The moment stretched, building, waiting. Then Arthur smiled softly. Can I kiss you? The fact that he asked somehow made my heart melt. I nodded. Please. Arthur closed the distance between us. And after 2 years of wondering what it would feel like, I finally found out. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some movie moment with fireworks exploding in the background. It was better, because it was real, warm, gentle, a little nervous, a little hesitant, and absolutely worth the wait. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were smiling. Neither of us could seem to stop. Arthur laughed quietly. Wow. I nodded. Yeah, definitely should have done that sooner. About 2 years sooner. His grin returned. I agree. For the first time since I'd met him, there were no questions left. No uncertainty. No guessing. No wondering if the attraction was mutual. Arthur liked me. I liked Arthur. And somehow the thing we'd both been afraid to risk had finally happened. What neither of us realized that night was how quickly things were about to become serious. Because once Arthur stopped hiding how he felt, he didn't hold back. And honestly, neither did I. After that first kiss, everything changed. And somehow, nothing changed at all. That sounds contradictory, but it's true. Arthur was still Arthur, still sarcastic, still impossible to beat in an argument, still capable of turning even the most ordinary conversation into something entertaining. The difference was that now I could hold his hand while he did it. Now I could kiss him goodbye. Now I didn't have to pretend that every time I looked at him, my heart wasn't doing ridiculous things. For the first few weeks, everything felt almost unreal, like we were making up for lost time. We'd text constantly, good morning messages, random jokes throughout the day, photos of things that reminded us of each other. It was the kind of relationship I'd secretly wanted for years, but had convinced myself probably didn't exist. One Saturday morning, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed. Arthur. Question. I smiled immediately. Me. That's not a question. 3 dots appeared. Then, Arthur. Would you like to accompany me to breakfast? Me. That's better. Arthur. Answer the question. Me. Depends. Arthur. On what? Me. Will there be pancakes? His response came instantly. Arthur. Obviously. 20 minutes later, he was outside my apartment. That became another thing surprisingly fast. Neither of us liked being apart for very long. It wasn't unhealthy. It wasn't obsessive. We just genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Something that still amazed me. I'd dated people before. Good people. Nice people. But with Arthur, there was an ease I'd never experienced. Being around him didn't require effort. It felt natural, comfortable, like home. A few months into the relationship, we developed a routine. Every Wednesday night became our dinner night. Every Sunday morning became breakfast together. Movie nights happened at least once a week. And somehow Arthur gradually took over half my apartment. Not intentionally. It just happened. A toothbrush appeared in my bathroom. A hoodie appeared on my couch. His favorite coffee started filling my kitchen cabinets. One evening I opened a drawer and found 3 of his t-shirts folded neatly inside. I laughed. When Arthur arrived later that night, I held one up. Care to explain this? He looked completely unbothered. Oh. Oh? I was wondering where that went. I stared at him. Arthur. What? You basically live here. His grin appeared immediately. Do I? I pointed toward the drawer. Evidence. He stepped closer. Are you complaining? The problem was that he knew exactly what he was doing. I rolled my eyes. No. Good. Then he kissed me, which was unfair, extremely unfair, because it worked every time. A few weeks later, I got my revenge. Arthur had the day off, and I was at his apartment for the first time in a while. While he was showering, I opened the closet looking for a blanket. Instead, I found several shirts. My shirts. I immediately started laughing. Arthur appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, hair still damp. What? I held up one of my shirts. His eyes widened. Oh. Oh? That's not what it looks like. It looks exactly like what it is. Arthur rubbed the back of his neck. Caught. Finally. You steal my clothes. He crossed his arms. You steal mine. I do not. Ricardo. I borrow them. That's stealing with extra steps. I couldn't argue with that. Eventually, we both ended up laughing. Because the truth was obvious. Neither of us wanted reminders to leave. We wanted reminders to stay. Around 6 months into dating, something happened that made me realize how serious this relationship had become. It was a Tuesday, a completely ordinary day. Work had been awful, nothing catastrophic. Just one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong. Traffic, deadlines, technical issues. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. The kind of exhausted that settles behind your eyes. I unlocked my apartment and walked inside. Immediately, I smelled food. Then I heard movement in the kitchen. Arthur. He looked up as I entered. Hey. The tension I'd been carrying all day instantly eased. Just seeing him helped. That realization hit me unexpectedly. Arthur noticed immediately. Tough day? I nodded. He walked over without saying anything, wrapped his arms around me, and simply held me. No advice, no solutions, no speeches, just quiet support. The kind that feels rare, the kind that's easy to underestimate until someone gives it to you. After a moment, he pulled back slightly. Dinner's ready. I looked at him, then at the food he'd already made, and something shifted inside me. Because this wasn't about dinner. It wasn't about convenience. It wasn't about romance. It was about partnership. Arthur had seen I was having a rough day through a few texts, so he'd shown up. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. That mattered more than I could explain. Later that night, we were sitting on the couch, my head resting against his shoulder, a movie playing that neither of us was really watching. Arthur absent-mindedly ran his fingers through my hair, something he did whenever he thought I was asleep. Except I wasn't asleep. I was thinking about the last few months, about how happy I was, about how quickly he'd become part of my life. Then another thought hit me, one that scared me slightly, because it felt too big, too soon, too important. I turned toward him. Arthur looked down. What? I almost said it. Almost. The words reached the edge of my mouth, then stopped. Not because they weren't true, because they were. I was falling in love with him. Maybe I already had. But saying it felt enormous, life-changing. Arthur studied my face. You were about to say something. I smiled. Maybe. What? I shook my head. Not yet. He narrowed his eyes suspiciously, but eventually smiled too. Okay. The thing I didn't know was that Arthur had been hiding something as well. Something he'd been thinking about for weeks. And before long, both of us were going to stop holding back. A few days after that night on the couch, I started noticing Arthur acting strangely again. Not bad strange, just distracted, thoughtful. the same way he'd looked right before asking me out. At first, I ignored it. Everyone gets stuck in their own head sometimes. But after the fourth or fifth time catching him staring into space, I finally brought it up. We were making dinner together at my apartment. Or rather, Arthur was making dinner while I pretended to help. "You've chopped exactly 3 vegetables," he informed me. "I've been providing emotional support. You've been stealing pieces of chicken." "That too." Arthur shook his head, smiling. Then he went quiet again. I noticed immediately. "Okay." He looked up. "Okay, what? What's going on?" His eyebrows lifted. "Nothing." I laughed. "That's the same answer you gave before asking me out." Arthur froze. Only for a second. But I caught it. "Aha." He pointed a knife at me. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "That detective thing." "The detective thing is working." His eyes narrowed. I grinned. Arthur sighed dramatically. "I hate how much attention you pay." "No, you don't." "No," he smiled. "I really don't." That answer made my chest warm. It was such a simple thing. But Arthur always had a way of making simple things matter. Eventually, he changed the subject, but I could tell something was still on his mind. The mystery continued for almost 2 weeks. Then came Sunday, our breakfast day. Except this time, Arthur insisted on planning everything, which was immediately suspicious. Very suspicious. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise." "Arthur, it's a surprise." "You're annoying." "I know." The man was impossible. Around 10 in the morning, he picked me up, then drove us completely out of the city. I spent the entire drive trying to get information. Arthur refused to give me anything. After 40 minutes, we arrived at a small lakeside park. The place was beautiful. Trees swayed gently in the breeze. The water reflected the morning sunlight. Families walked nearby. A few people were fishing. It felt peaceful, comfortable. Arthur parked the car. I looked around. "Okay." "Okay? What's happening?" He smiled nervously, and immediately my stomach flipped. Because Arthur was nervous. Again. Oh my God. "What?" "You're doing the face." His eyes widened. "What face?" "The nervous face." "I don't have a nervous face." "You absolutely have a nervous face." Arthur groaned. "I hate this conversation." I started laughing. Then something occurred to me. A possibility. One that made my pulse jump. No, surely not. We'd only been together around 7 months. That would be crazy, right? Arthur opened the trunk and grabbed a picnic basket. A picnic basket. An actual picnic basket. The man was making this impossible. We walked toward the lake, eventually finding a quiet spot beneath a large tree. Arthur spread out a blanket, set everything up, and somehow grew even more nervous. At that point, I was almost certain something important was happening. The question was what? We ate, talked, laughed, but Arthur's attention seemed split, like he was building towards something. Finally, after nearly an hour, he took a deep breath. There it was, the moment, whatever it was. Arthur looked at me, then laughed softly. I had a whole speech prepared. I blinked. A speech? Yeah. What happened to it? I forgot every word. I couldn't stop smiling. That somehow made him smile too. For a few seconds, we just looked at each other. Then Arthur shook his head. Fine. Fine? I'm doing this the simple way. My heart started racing. Fast. Very fast. Arthur shifted closer. Close enough that our knees touched. Then he reached for my hand. And suddenly, I knew. Not what he was about to say, but how serious it was. Arthur squeezed my fingers gently, his eyes never leaving mine. Ricardo, the way he said my name made my chest tighten. Yeah? His smile softened. The nervousness was still there, but something stronger existed underneath it. Something honest, something real. I love you. Everything stopped. The lake, the breeze, the people nearby, the sounds around us. All of it disappeared. Because for a second, I couldn't process what I'd just heard. Arthur loved me, and somehow hearing it out loud felt even bigger than I'd imagined. He laughed quietly. Apparently, my stunned expression was familiar. You're doing the thing again. What thing? The staring. I finally laughed, a slightly emotional laugh, because my eyes were suddenly suspiciously warm, and because I've been wanting to say those exact words for weeks, maybe longer. You beat me to it. Arthur blinked. What? I squeezed his hand. I love you too. The relief that crossed his face nearly destroyed me, like he'd genuinely been worried, which seemed ridiculous. But then again, I understood completely, because I've been worried too. Arthur leaned forward, pressed his forehead against mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The words had already been said. The biggest ones. The important ones. And somehow, everything felt different afterward. Not because our relationship changed, because now there were no walls left, no hesitation, no fear, just honesty. Eventually, Arthur smiled. So, I guess we're really doing this. I laughed. Apparently, he kissed me, slow, gentle, perfect. And sitting there beside the lake, with the man I'd spent 2 years secretly wanting before we ever dated, I honestly couldn't imagine being happier. What I didn't know was that life was about to test us. Not through drama, not through betrayal, but through something far more difficult. The question of what came next, and whether we were ready for it. The funny thing about falling in love is that it makes you start thinking about the future without even realizing it. At first, Arthur and I were just enjoying being together. Then suddenly we were making plans months ahead. Concert tickets, weekend trips, holiday schedules, birthday plans. Without either of us saying it directly, we had stopped thinking in terms of me and you. It had quietly become us. The realization hit me one evening while we were grocery shopping. Not exactly a romantic setting, just a crowded supermarket on a Thursday night. Arthur was arguing passionately about pasta sauce. I am telling you, this brand is better. It's not. It absolutely is. It tastes exactly the same. Arthur looked personally offended. It does not. A woman nearby started laughing. I couldn't blame her. We probably sounded ridiculous. Eventually, Arthur tossed both jars into the cart. There. There what? We'll settle it scientifically. I stared at him. Scientifically? Taste test. You take grocery shopping way too seriously. I care about excellence. You care about pasta. Same thing. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the shopping basket. And that's when it hit me. This was what I wanted. Not grand romantic gestures, not dramatic moments, just ordinary life with Arthur. The simple stuff, the everyday stuff, the boring stuff that somehow wasn't boring when he was around. A few weeks later, we took our first real vacation together. 3 days at a small cabin outside the city. Nothing luxurious, just a quiet place surrounded by trees. No work, no schedules, no distractions. The first night, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Arthur had his feet propped on the railing. I was curled beside him with a blanket. Everything felt peaceful, comfortable. Then Arthur spoke. You know what's weird? What? I spent 2 years trying not to ask you out. I laughed. We've established that we're both idiots. True. He reached for my hand. But honestly, what? Arthur looked at me, a soft smile appearing. I think I'd have regretted it forever if I never did. My chest tightened because I knew exactly what he meant. I thought the same thing, more than once. The idea of Arthur remaining just my barber felt impossible now. The thought of never knowing what this relationship could have become hurt to imagine. So I squeezed his hand. You know something? What? I'm really glad you were brave enough for both of us. Arthur smiled. I wasn't brave. You asked me out. After 2 years. Details. He laughed, then leaned over and kissed my temple. A small gesture, one that somehow felt more intimate than anything else. That trip ended up becoming one of my favorite memories. Not because anything extraordinary happened, because nothing extraordinary happened. We cooked together, went hiking, watched movies, fell asleep on the couch, laughed constantly. It felt like practice for a life neither of us was ready to admit we wanted. But eventually reality returned. Work got busy, schedules became complicated, life resumed. And that's when the next challenge appeared. Not a fight, not a disagreement, a conversation. One we'd both been quietly avoiding. It happened almost a year after our first date. Arthur was staying at my apartment again. At that point, he spent more nights there than at his own place. His clothes occupied half my closet. His coffee occupied my kitchen. His presence occupied my entire heart. We were eating dinner when Arthur casually said, "My lease is up in 3 months." I nodded. Okay. He poked at his food. Yeah. Silence. Then another silence. Then a third. I narrowed my eyes. Arthur. What? What was that? What was what? The thing you just did. I didn't do anything. You absolutely did. He sighed. I immediately knew. The conversation. The one we'd both been circling for months. Arthur looked down, then back at me. Have you ever thought about it? My heart skipped. About what? He gave me a look. I laughed nervously. Oh. Yeah. Oh. Moving in together. The topic neither of us had mentioned, despite the fact that we were already halfway there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Arthur looked surprisingly nervous. Again. Which honestly never got old. Finally, I answered. Yes. His eyebrows lifted. Yes? I've thought about it. Relief flashed across his face. Then he smiled. A real smile. Not the playful one, the vulnerable one. The one he only showed when something genuinely mattered. I have too. And just like that, the conversation started. The practical details, the concerns, the excitement, the fears, all of it. Neither of us rushed. Neither of us pressured the other. We simply talked, honestly, like partners. By the end of the night, no final decision had been made, but something important had happened. The future wasn't a hypothetical anymore. It was becoming real. And as Arthur fell asleep beside me later that night, his arm wrapped around my waist, I realized something. I wasn't scared, not even a little, because for the first time in my life, the future felt clear. It looked like lazy Sunday mornings, grocery store arguments, movie nights, shared closets, and Arthur. Always Arthur. What I didn't know was that a much bigger question was waiting just around the corner, one that neither of us expected, one that would change our lives forever. 2 months after the conversation about moving in together, Arthur officially moved into my apartment. And somehow, despite spending most of our time together already, it still felt like a huge step. The first week was chaos. Not relationship chaos, box chaos, furniture chaos. "Why do you own 17 black t-shirts?" I asked while unpacking. Arthur looked offended. "They're different. They're literally identical." "They are not." I held up 2 shirts. "They're the same shirt." Arthur pointed dramatically. "That one is charcoal." I stared, then started laughing. He joined in a second later. Living together turned out to be surprisingly easy. Not perfect, just easy. We learned each other's routines, shared responsibilities, figured out how to navigate space together. There were adjustments, of course. Arthur woke up earlier than I did. I somehow used every glass in the apartment within 24 hours. He stole blankets. I stole hoodies. Normal couple stuff. Nothing major. The best part wasn't the big moments. It was the little ones. Coming home and knowing he'd be there. Cooking dinner together. Falling asleep beside him every night. Waking up beside him every morning. The ordinary parts of life became my favorite parts. One evening, nearly 6 months after moving in together, we hosted a small dinner with friends. Nothing fancy, just food, drinks, and conversation. At some point, Arthur disappeared into the kitchen with one of my oldest friends. I didn't think much about it until later. As everyone prepared to leave, my friend pulled me aside. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." He looked amused. "When are you two getting married?" I nearly choked on my drink. "What?" He shrugged. "I'm serious." I laughed. "We're not even engaged. Yet." The way he said it made me pause. Then he smiled. "Ricardo." "What?" "I've known you for years." I nodded. "I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at Arthur." For a moment, I didn't know what to say, because part of me knew he was right. The conversation stayed with me long after everyone left, not because of marriage specifically, because of what it represented. Commitment, a future, the kind of future Arthur and I had slowly been building. A few weeks later, something happened that completely caught me off guard. It was Saturday morning. Arthur and I were walking through a street market downtown. The weather was perfect, the kind of day that makes everyone seem happier. We stopped at a small coffee stand. Arthur went to order drinks while I found a nearby table. A minute later, an older man sitting beside me smiled. "Your husband seems nice." I blinked. "My what?" He gestured toward Arthur. "Your husband." I looked over. Arthur was laughing at something the barista said, completely unaware of the conversation. For some reason, I didn't correct the man immediately. I just looked at Arthur, then smiled. Yeah, the older man nodded. You can tell. That was it, the entire conversation. But something about it stayed with me. Because for one brief second, hearing Arthur described that way hadn't felt strange. It had felt right. The realization scared me slightly and excited me far more. Life continued. Months passed. Work remained busy. Our relationship remained solid. The apartment felt more like home than ever. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was our anniversary, 1 year since our first date. Arthur insisted on recreating it. Same restaurant, same table, same walk afterward. I thought it was incredibly cheesy, which secretly meant I loved it. Dinner was perfect. The conversation was easy. The food was excellent. Everything felt familiar, comfortable. Then we reached the riverfront, the exact same spot where we'd shared our first kiss. I smiled immediately. You planned this. Maybe. You absolutely planned this. Arthur laughed. For a moment we stood together watching the water. Just like before, the city lights reflected across the river. People passed in the distance. The night felt strangely familiar. Then Arthur grew quiet, very quiet, and suddenly my heart started racing because I recognized that look, the nervous look, the one I'd seen before every major moment in our relationship. Arthur took a breath, then another. I stared. Arthur. Yeah? Why are you doing the face? He laughed nervously. I hate that you know my face. I know all your faces. That made him smile. Then the smile faded into something softer, more emotional. My pulse doubled, because suddenly I knew, not exactly what was about to happen, but I knew this moment mattered. Arthur stepped closer, took my hands, and looked directly into my eyes. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. The same smile that had first caught my attention through a barbershop window years ago. The smile that had changed my entire life. Ricardo. My throat felt tight. Yeah? Arthur squeezed my hands and started speaking, words that immediately made my heart stop. Arthur squeezed my hands. The river shimmered behind him. The city lights reflected in his eyes. And suddenly I understood why he'd been nervous all evening. Because whatever he was about to say mattered. A lot. Ricardo, he said again. His voice was steadier this time, but I could still hear the emotion underneath it. The honesty, the vulnerability, the same vulnerability I'd fallen in love with. For a moment he smiled. Then he shook his head. You know, I had another speech. I laughed immediately. Another one? Yep. What happened to it? I forgot it. Of course he did. That only made me smile harder. Arthur looked down briefly, then back up. I think that's okay, though. Why? Because every important thing that's happened between us has gone completely off script. I couldn't argue with that. The first date, the first kiss, the first time we said, I love you. None of it had gone according to plan, and somehow that made it perfect. Arthur took a breath, then another. I spent 2 years trying to figure out how to ask you out. I laughed softly. True. And then I spent months trying to tell you I loved you. Also true. He smiled. Apparently I'm not very efficient. You're terrible at timing. Exactly. For a second, we both laughed. Then the smile slowly faded from his face. Not because he was unhappy, because he was serious, because this mattered. "Ricardo," he said quietly, "when I met you, I thought you were just another client." I smiled. "Fair. I never imagined you'd become my best friend." My chest tightened. Arthur continued, "I never imagined you'd become the person I want to tell everything to." The knot in my throat grew stronger. "The person I look for first when something good happens." His voice softened. "The person I want beside me when something bad happens." I felt my eyes stinging. Arthur noticed immediately. That only made him smile. Then he stepped even closer, close enough that all I could focus on was him. "I love our life." My heart hammered. "I love our apartment." A small laugh escaped me. "I love our ridiculous grocery store arguments." "Those are important." "They are." Arthur grinned. Then his expression softened again. But mostly, his voice caught slightly, and suddenly my own breathing became impossible. "Mostly, I love you." The words hit me just as hard as they had beside the lake months earlier. Maybe harder. Because now I understood exactly what they meant. Not just romance, not just attraction. Partnership, trust, home, everything. Arthur squeezed my hands, then slowly lowered himself onto one knee. The entire world disappeared. I couldn't hear traffic, couldn't hear people, couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat. And Arthur, looking up at me, smiling nervously, beautifully, wonderfully nervous. "Arthur," he laughed. "Yeah." My eyes were already watering. "You idiot." "That's fair." I couldn't stop smiling. Neither could he. Then Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. My heart completely gave up at that point, just stopped functioning. Arthur opened it. Inside was a simple ring, elegant, perfect, very Arthur. Nothing flashy, just meaningful, just real, exactly like him. He looked directly into my eyes. "Ricardo." My throat felt too tight to answer, so I just nodded. Arthur smiled, then asked the question, the one that changed everything. "Will you marry me?" I don't remember the next few seconds clearly, mostly because I started laughing and crying at the same time, which was not my finest moment. Arthur immediately looked concerned. "Is that good?" I laughed harder. "Oh my God." "Ricardo?" "Yes." Relief exploded across his face. "Yes?" "Yes, Arthur." His smile became the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "Seriously?" I grabbed his face. "Seriously." Then I kissed him before he could ask a third time. The people nearby started cheering. Apparently, we'd attracted more attention than I'd realized. Arthur laughed against my lips, still smiling, still somehow looking shocked. When we finally pulled apart, he slipped the ring onto my finger, then stood up, and immediately wrapped me in the tightest hug imaginable. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. We just held each other. The river behind us, the city around us, the future waiting ahead. Finally, Arthur pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. "We really did this." I smiled. "We did." The crazy part wasn't the proposal. It wasn't the ring. It wasn't even getting engaged. The crazy part was realizing it all started with a haircut. One random afternoon, one random decision, one guy standing behind a barber chair, 2 years of flirting, one dinner invitation, and a lifetime that followed. A few months later, Arthur and I got married in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Nothing extravagant, nothing complicated, just the people we loved most, the people who had watched our story unfold. My favorite moment wasn't walking down the aisle. It wasn't the ceremony. It wasn't even saying, "I do." It was catching Arthur looking at me the same way he always had. The same way he'd looked at me through that barbershop mirror years ago. Like he couldn't believe I was real. Like he couldn't believe I was his. The truth was, I felt exactly the same. Sometimes I still do. Even now. Especially now. And every time someone asks how we met, Arthur always grins before answering. Because he knows exactly what's coming. Believe it or not, he'll say, he was just a haircut. Then I'll roll my eyes and he'll laugh. And somehow, after all these years, he'll still look at me like he did from the very beginning. Like asking me out was the best decision he ever made. For once, I completely agree with him.